Welcome to Phenomenal Feats, brought to you by the official Speedrun Hall of Fame. These are the moments in time we want all of speedrunning to remember. And this month, November 2022, marks our first nominees, and now it's time for you to pick which of these phenomenal feats will be immortalized in the official Speedrun Hall of Fame. Moment number 1, the 1990 Nintendo World Championships. The year was 1990. Ninja Turtles and the Fresh Prince were the hottest franchises. We celebrated the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope. It was a time we all feel was a simpler one, before the internet. A time we're nostalgic for these days, in more ways than one. And that year, 1990, marked the first time in years a game developer would host a contest to allow the most skilled gamers in the United States to compete for prizes. Nintendo was on top of the world in 1990, with Super Mario Bros. 3 taking the gaming community by storm. Not to mention, the Game Boy was quickly turning heads with Tetris as its packing game. In 1989, a film starring Fred Savage was produced with Nintendo's blessing, and The Wizard would take theaters by storm. Okay, maybe not quite by storm, but it did cause many gamers to look up when Nintendo was so inspired by the film's in-universe video game competition that they decided to put their own on. Nintendo picked 29 lucky cities across America where kids and adults alike could compete in 3 age groups where prizes were given away to the winners. These prizes included a brand new 1990 Geo Prism, a $10,000 savings bond, copies of the legendary Nintendo World Championships NES cartridge, and more. This event was widely advertised on children's networks as well as video game magazines, such as the extremely popular Nintendo Power. Therefore, hundreds of contestants were able to travel and compete for the finals, which were held in Hollywood, California. The winners were finally determined after many rounds of competition. Players were required to play 3 games to a preset goal. Super Mario Bros., where players needed to gather 50 coins, Rad Racer, where you had to complete the first track, and finally, NES Tetris, where players could then stack lines and rack up that score. Winners were determined by that final score. Jeff Hansen won in the 11 and under category, Thor Ackerland won in the 12 to 17-year-old group, and Robert Whiteman won in the 18 and older adult competition, marking the 3 champions from each age group. And this moment would transform video gaming and gaming competition in many people's eyes. This was just one step towards the successful eSports and speedrunning scenes that we have today, which might not have been possible without Nintendo and Universal Studios making it happen. Moment number 2, the very first GDQ, Classic Games Done Quick, held in 2010. Speedrunning has taken on a life of its own, and multiple times throughout the year, many organizations stream live marathons, the majority of which raise money for charities and groups of underprivileged folks. In 2022, it seems like there are constant charity events, including the Hall of Fame's own Skip the Stigma, which will be held from November 4th to November 6th. Countless millions have been raised by speedrunning events for dozens of charities across the globe. It might, however, be argued that none of them would even exist, much less be successful, without the groundwork laid down over the past 12 years by the folks over at Games Done Quick. Ever since the first GDQ was held in 2010, every January and June, speedrunners gather to showcase their finest runs, all in the hopes of raising some money for a good cause. They fly in from across the globe and perform live in front of thousands and thousands of people, all in a no-reset run that is the pinnacle of pressure for a speedrunner. Since 2010, when the first event was held, the GDQ series of fundraisers has grown to extreme heights, with each mainline event raising literal millions of dollars for a variety of charities and nonprofit organizations, all in front of an audience of hundreds of thousands of people.
I remember also everybody thinking that the $5,000 we'd wanted to raise for the charity, that's right, not million, thousand, K, was ridiculously optimistic, and it turned out we raised roughly double that. We raised roughly 10,000, which to us seemed so absurdly high, so absurdly crazy, which obviously with the way it's grown, now they routinely raise millions of dollars in one shot. Seems kind of silly now, but we could not have predicted Twitch and the explosion of live streaming popularity and the explosion really of speedrunning at that time.
It has also helped inspire countless other marathons, organizations, and charity-driven people who live to make a difference in the world.
It started off, it was supposed to take place at MagFest, and very long story short, the internet of the hotel that MagFest had taken place at that year was not up to snuff. So we ended up moving it to Mike Uyama's mother's basement. Very stereotypical gamer locale. But besides that, besides the literally running it mostly out of the basement, I think the entire tech setup was Mikuyama's laptop, a standard definition capture card, and a couple of microphones.
Starting with the very first run, a Mega Man speedrun performed by the legendary Andrew G, Classic Games Done Quick kicked off a legacy that is unmatched in speedrunning and likely never will be rivaled. The schedule was filled to the brim, with legendary speedrunners both past and present such as Andrew G, Feats, Empty Eye, Rom Scout, and so many others, including Mikuyama himself.
I did the Teenage Mutant Acid Turtles run, as it's now known, which if there's a run from Classic Games Done Quick that people remember, it is probably that one, where Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started visually glitching out, and this was after it had already crashed twice earlier in the marathon. So it got cut, it got added back in, and then it started to visually freak out, and I do remember Mikuyama trying to sort of cut it on the spot and me overruling him, because I just sort of wanted to see how far I could go before effectively the game crashed, which was what I was expecting to happen. And as it turned out, as I kept playing, I realized, okay, everything is visually all messed up, but everything positionally seems to be where it should be. I basically said, okay, everything is visually all messed up, but I've done this enough times that as long as the game holds out, I think I can do this. If you go back and watch that, you might be able to see the realization of that sort of cross my face, even though I don't think I actually ever verbally said it, until kind of the run was over, or until I thought I could sort of breathe, or I thought I had it at Shredder. Thankfully, I didn't flub that, so.
Though the first CGDQ focused on almost exclusively NES titles, a handful of other consoles were sprinkled throughout the event, laying the groundwork for today's GDQ events, which host games from the Atari all the way to the modern generation of consoles. With the best speedrunners representing dozens of countries and thousands of different games and consoles, GDQ has grown tremendously and continues to be a positive force in the community to this day.
The Speed Gamers, now known as TSG TV, did a few kind of series charity marathons before SDA/GDQ did. And so we kind of leaned on them for experience and guidance, and a couple of the TSG members actually came by and helped us out and frankly gave GDQ some much needed legitimacy, as weird as that sounds now with as big an operation as it is. I would say the main thing I remember is just how small and humble and sort of held together with duct tape, metaphorically, Classic Games Done Quick really was. And it's very cool and very sort of humbling to see what it has become now.
Moment number 3. A 17-year-old Doom world record falls to Dwaze in 2020. Speedrunning has a complex legacy that is difficult to track, as a lot of the earliest speedruns are now lost to the ether of the internet. As speedrunning has existed since the 1980s, a lot of the original footage of these runs have long since been lost. The origins of organized speedrunning, however, aren't nearly as untraceable, and a lot of the history leads back to the earliest speedrunning days of the mid-1990s, where Doom was by far the most popular speedrun online. Dozens of runners would upload their runs to the early internet using WADs, which were files designed to play back as a movie in the actual Doom game. This way, you could download someone's run and watch it back natively on your copy of Doom. This was the only way to verify runs back then, as the early internet didn't have the bandwidth or the storage space to hold full videos. This legacy persisted into the 2000s with games such as Quake, but Doom continued to be one of the most popular speedruns, and on April 2nd, 2005, a runner by the name of Drew stx-Vile DeVore set a world record in the ultra-violent speed category. This run, submitted as a 5-minute in-game time WAD, was later retimed to 6 minutes and 17 seconds of RTA time in order to fit with the modern leaderboards years later on speedrun.com. The run persisted as the only known world record. That is, until 17 years after that fateful spring day, when the run finally fell. On March 13th, 2020, a Belgian speedrunner named Dwaze performed a run of Ultimate Doom. The same version stx-Vile's run was done on. Dwaze was finally able to break one of speedrunning's longest standing records. With a time of 5 minutes and 36 seconds, his RTA time did in fact end the reign of that legendary speedrun, topping one of Doom's highest watermarks. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, just because Dwaze beat the RTA time, the old record's in-game time was still faster, so that shouldn't count, right? Well, you'd be wrong, because just a month later, on April 15th, 2020, Dwaze was able to beat the in-game time world record as well, and now he sits alone at the top, holding both records for IGT and RTA. How long will his records stand? Only time will tell. Moment number 4. TGH and Glan showdown for over an hour in a nail-biter race at SGDQ 2022. Grezzo was tasked with transferring the classic Game Boy title, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, to the Nintendo Switch in 2019. And did they ever accomplish this task? Link's Awakening on the Switch is a lovely game, with a beautiful art style, haunting music, and lovable characters in very memorable settings. This port was met with critical acclaim, and that isn't just from casual players. Speedrunners from around the globe immediately began tackling the new Zelda game, finding all sorts of glitches and skips like Hinox Warp, Hookshot Rocket, Villa Skip, and more. Over time, this game was becoming faster and faster. TGH, the first runner to record a sub-hour in the Switch version of the game, was among the pioneers of this run, but Glan was no slouch and was perfectly matched with TGH going into their head-to-head showdown at SGDQ 2022.
Like, I was obviously really nervous because TGH is like really, really good, and like even if he hadn't put in as much practice as me, like he was still absolutely smashing my time, like just like within a couple days of starting to practice again. So like I was really nervous.
The race was insanely close. The two runners were practically step in step for the final hour of the race, including a significant portion where they were no more than 15 seconds apart.
I think after finishing D4, like I was a little bit behind him, but then I got fairly lucky and egging him, and I heard the commentators like kind of going wild. Like it wasn't until I rewatched the race I realized like we were like synced
for more than 30 minutes. In a game with this much parity, this was a remarkable sight to see. One of the greatest races of all time. Link's Awakening is simply not a game where you can have two racers this close, but they did it. And on the biggest stage there is. And what a stage it was. A jam-packed SGDQ crowd, the first crowd gathered after the pandemic, witnessed this phenomenal showdown, which TG finally took the win in when a stroke of bad luck at the final boss cost Glan just enough time to give TG the edge.
I still a little bit kicked myself because like, we were like absolutely like synced up like right at the end, like in the nightmare fight right after egging him. We got different RNGs. We were synced up. And then I like completely choked on the Moldorm phase or something. So I was behind like 40 seconds or something at the end. And I felt a little bad about that because it would have been an actual like photo finish if I hadn't done that.
This race is absolutely a must watch. And if you're a fan of Glan, TGH, or the Switch's Link's Awakening, you owe it to yourself to watch this epic showdown. So tell us, which of these phenomenal feats did you think was the greatest? Don't forget to vote now. Your vote is good until November 30th, 2022. Both the voting form and the submission form are in the description below, or you can head to speedrunhallofame.com and get more information there. Until then, take care, everyone.